Welcome, everyone. This is Rob Dietl from MIT Sloan Executive Education. Delighted to welcome you to today's webinar, Leveraging Alumni Relationships, Best Practices for Executive Education. This is another one in a series of webinars that we've been hosting recently to bring information to you as members of UNICON on a different range of topics and some of the great research that's being generated by the research committee. Today's topic, I think, will be very engaging and kind of share some of the latest developments in terms of what's happening in alumni relations at different schools. As we get started, just a few points I wanted to point out. If we could go to the next slide. You should be seeing the screen webinar. We'll be working off of a slide deck today. You should have a control panel as well that you'll be able to see. One of the things I'd like to point out is that the slide deck for today's presentation will be available. You can download that from the handouts section in the control panel. You'll also have an ability to ask questions throughout the program. If you do have questions that you'd like to ask during the program, we'll do our best to address those questions, but we'll also leave some time at the end for questions and answers. So please take advantage of the questions box in your control panel, and you can submit your questions that way, and we'll relay them to our guests today that are hosting the session. Again, just a reminder that today's webinar will be recorded, and we will be posting it for reference later on the UNICON website. So if you'd like to refer to it later, it will be available, or if you have colleagues that can't join us for the live webinar, they'll have access to the information in the presentation as well. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and get started with an introduction to today's guests that are leading our program. We're very lucky to have Pat Cataldo and Bob Stilliard leading today's session on alumni relations. Pat is an independent consultant, instructor, and researcher. Prior to becoming a consultant, he was an executive education senior level positions at the business schools at both UNC Chapel Hill and Penn State University. Before joining academia in 2004, Pat also had extensive corporate experience. So he has a nice blend of being on the exec side and also being in the corporate world, where he led training and development organizations, global Fortune 500 companies. He received an honorary doctorate from Grand Valley State University in Michigan, completed Darden's executive program at the University of Virginia, has an MBA from Boston College, and an undergraduate degree from St. Francis University. Pat also served as the former chair of the board for UNICON and is an emeritus board member. Pat was a former board member at the American Society for Training and Development as well, and the Professional Society for Sales and Marketing Training. Also joining us, as I mentioned, is Bob Stilliard. Bob is an associate member of faculty at Ashridge Business School and an independent business educator. He held a number of financial management posts within the BAT Industries Group. They've both put a lot of hard work and effort into creating this research report that they're going to share with us today. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Pat to get started, and thank you again for joining. Pat, over to you.
Thanks, Rob. Bob and I are happy to be joining you for this webinar on leveraging alumni relationships, a subject that's very timely given the continual need to find candidates for open enrollment programs, custom programs, and as well as some recent announcements. I'm happy to say that we have representatives from 8 of the schools that we interviewed, as well as participants joining us from around the world. So whether it's a very early start for you at 6:30 in the morning or a late evening at 10:30 at night, we're delighted to have you take the time out of your schedule to join us for this webinar. At the onset of this project, we believe we'd identified a topic that would be a great benefit to UNICON members, both from a financial as well as a non-financial standpoint. But the importance of this topic was best summarized by a statement made during one of the initial interviews, when a school representative said, "Dealing with alumni has always been a lingering issue, yet no one has ever really addressed it yet." This was great affirmation for us on the relevance of this project, and we found that it was a topic people really wanted to contribute to. We'll cover a lot of information in this webinar today, ranging from comments on the research process itself to those who are involved in alumni contacts, how they do it, what offers are made available, the results, measurements, and support of school officials, as well as comments from executives and HR professionals that we interviewed on what schools can do to promote more alumni engagement. Finally, we'll share a framework and our recommendations, followed by a question and answer session. As we go through the presentation, if you have a question, since your mic will not be active, please type it out and we'll do our very best to address it as the presentation goes along. Now I'd like to turn it over to Bob Stilliard in the UK.
Good. Okay, so I'd like to make a few introductory remarks. Just first of all, the project as a whole, of course, was sponsored by UNICON and by its research committee, but it should be important to note that in common with the other research reports that UNICON has published, the views and opinions expressed are solely those of its authors, namely Pat and myself. Now, at the outset, we did not have a premise that we were specifically working to, other than that the subject, as Pat has mentioned, seemed to be of interest to us and likely to be of practical value to executive education organizations. However, after a few initial interviews, it became clear to us that this subject seemed to be a neglected one. This was a view that was shared by many in our research. There seemed to be a shared sense that alumni represented a potentially valuable resource for executive education, but that potential was not being fully realized. In fact, there was almost, in some interviews, a sense of guilt being expressed that the job hadn't been properly addressed and had been put off, relegated perhaps behind more apparently urgent issues. However, having said that, a small number of schools declared the alumni relationship issue one of strategic importance for them. And during our study, one of those schools, the Ross School at the University of Michigan, announced a major initiative to engage university alumni with executive education by offering them a free program once every 5 years. Now, this is going to be covered in a little more detail later during the webinar. Now, so where were our respondents from? Now, they're from schools that had all volunteered to take part, and the interviewees themselves were either self-nominated or nominated by their school. To better understand our sample, we asked a number of questions at the start of our interviews about the interviewees' work position and experience, along with some questions about their institution's involvement with executive education. The respondents were relatively senior, a significant experience with their current employer, and further experience either within the sector at another school or with employers in industry or government. So a significant amount of years of experience in those two situations. Now, we also asked interviewees about the composition of their database of alumni. And the result was evenly split between those whose databases only contained alumni of executive education programs and those whose databases also included alumni from the business school or the university. Of course, we've got to recognize here that many schools have different business models. Somewhere there is the business school is the biggest part of the whole university, and others where the business school is only a minor part, and maybe even the executive education part of that is even quite small as well. So, but recognizing that there was that fairly wide mix of business model. We also inquired about whether the business was more domestic or international in nature, that is the executive education business. In other words, whether participants largely came from the school's own country or from the exterior. The results showed a small majority in favor of international participation. Okay, so what about the revenue split? What was the size of the schools? More than half of the interviewees represented larger schools, namely those with more than $12 million of executive education revenues. And when looking at how the responses varied according to school size, it's interesting to note that the larger schools were more likely to grant full alumni status to executive education participants, that is, non-degree participants. Now, how about the geography? Where were our interviewees coming from? You can see from that chart that a very good selection of schools were interviewed, representing a good cross-section not only of the membership of UNICON, but also of the industry in general. In terms of other aspects of the research process, it was determined that the research should be carried out by a literature survey followed by one-to-one interviews, rather than by means of a questionnaire. And that was really in response to the reactions to previous UNICON research projects. However, we did use a structured set of interview questions to keep the process consistent. So moving on to the engagement of alumni, we asked our interviews how they interacted with alumni, and with some interesting results. Although 50% of schools said they were regularly active in contacting alumni, 25% reported only partial engagement without a consistent or regular pattern to it. And 25% admitted to no activities at all to develop their business via alumni. In terms of the detail of how the schools engage with alumni, email is the most popular means, along with alumni events, advertising, writing articles in alumni newsletters and journals. And the range of frequency of contact was wide. In some cases, more than 20 contacts per month were being made. But that ranged right the way down to just 3 or 4 contacts per annum. Some interesting quotes we got, and we've listed 3 of them up there, just to look at different aspects of that contact with alumni. But overall, I think we could sum up the way in which people contact alumni by saying really that the overall impression gained from the interviews was that the use of alumni as a resource to help develop executive education business is underdeveloped, sometimes neglected or an afterthought, and not always treated in a strategically important way. Although all schools recognize that alumni exist and can be important for the school and for the executive department, but although the way in which alumni are engaged varies widely between schools, there is a sense among almost all schools that they're not being very effective, and that they should be doing more and doing what they already do in a better way. So at that point, with that review of the background to the research, I'll hand back to Pat for a deeper look at some of the findings.
I'd like to go into the alumni contacts and accessibility. One of the challenges for executive education organizations is to identify which alumni to contact. This involves working with other campus groups, primarily the alumni office, who normally is the keeper of the database of alumni contact information. The interviews on this interaction were very revealing, as only 25% said that they were able to contact all alumni at the school, with more responses, 29% saying they were free to only contact business school alumni, but 46%, nearly half of the schools we spoke with, said that they could only contact alumni with the permission of the alumni office, and some were not free to contact any alumni at all. Surprisingly, One school who could contact all alumni said they didn't use this opportunity very much. Some of the other comments noted that Exec Ed was subject to renting the list or allowed no contact at all. When able to access the names, some of the other comments that we got were the quality of the information in the database was sometimes not up to date, so it was really of little use. The ability to contact alumni was one challenge, but the ability to segment the list for real usability was clearly another. Some were able to request only names of alumni at certain companies with certain titles, and others were not able to segment their list at all. As far as offers and approaches, the primary way to approach alumni was some form of personal contact, and that was mentioned by many of the schools we spoke with. And that was individually addressed letters, emails, or personal phone calls. Many times, interviewees told us that the best method was to get referrals rather than to solicit attendance directly. Especially with former business school grads, it was noted that unless they'd been at a school at least 15 or 20 years, they may believe that they were getting the same professors and information they got when they were there. So it was appropriately noted that it was key to reinforce new content when discussing executive education with former MBAs or EMBAs. Whether alumni attended or not, it was important to keep them in the marketing mix so that they would know about executive education programs. The good news is that 90% of the schools we spoke with offered a special alumni discount for attending programs. While the range on average was between 10 and 20%, the results indicate that that wasn't enough incentive to really move the needle. Prior to establishing our, prior to publishing our paper, the University of Michigan took alumni incentives and discounts to a whole new level by making a major announcement. Instead of offering their alumni the opportunity to take one course every 5 years, the new announcement said that they offered their Ross Business School alumni free lifelong access to all open enrollment programs. They were only required to pay for room and meals while attending. And on top of that, there were incentives given to the Ross alumni where twice a year they could offer a 50% benefit off the price of the tuition for a program to any family or friends that they wanted or peers in their companies. And finally, all University of Michigan alumni were given a lifelong access benefit of 50% off as well. Called Alumni Advantage, this program is a tremendous offer with 23 open enrollment programs in 4 topic areas in 5 international locations with course fees ranging from $34.50 to $24,500. Only time will tell if this alumni benefit is successful in drawing more participants to their open enrollment programs. The question then came up as, do discounts work? The research shows that discounting has not been as successful for most schools as one might have thought. This can be a result of a number of factors. The lack of a dedicated focus on alumni contacts, alumni discount levels not being attractive enough, the lack of sufficient promotion of the alumni executive education benefit, or not closely monitoring or measuring the results. Some quotes we received bear this out. However, non-U.S. schools were more satisfied with their alumni program and that it did produce favorable results. A number of these schools cited their measurements of the exact increases they'd attained and the efforts that they had put forth, and justifiably, they were very proud of those results. Alumni status in the schools that we spoke with was granted by 38% of the schools we spoke with, who were able to offer an alumni benefit to non-credit executive education graduates. This status, however, was normally restricted to only participants in longer programs, greater than 2, 3, 4, or more weeks, or in some cases, a total number of accumulated program days of executive education attendance. Harvard was noted in our report as not only providing the same alumni benefits it does for its MBA graduates, but holding alumni reunions for its AMP graduates every 2 years in various locations throughout the world. These reunions were stated to be well received and many very well attended. Predictably, most noted that they had cordial relationships with their alumni office peers, but help and support was not always provided. When it was offered, executive education groups were extremely pleased with the help. School officials, namely deans, presidents, alumni office professionals, while sympathetic to executive education offerings of alumni benefits for lifelong learning that supported the school's mission, didn't regularly promote that benefit to alumni. Many times it was cited that they had other agenda items that were mentioned that would take precedence. However, it was noted that they knew more, that the more they knew about the executive education programs, the more opportunity there would be to mention it to alumni. Bob, I was wondering if you might have any comments on this.
Yeah, just some thoughts that I think that faculty have always, of course, got very, very good connections firsthand with and with participants, and of course, participants themselves often the one person that they will remember is the key faculty member associated with their program. So they're a great. The connection is really good to start with. And I think that most schools, and this was demonstrated through the research, most schools found that faculty wouldn't necessarily push themselves forward for in some role helping the school to connect with alumni, but whenever asked, they would respond very, very well. And there was a good base to build on in terms of the relationship that they had with alumni, and therefore would get a, relatively speaking, better response than someone from a marketing or administrative role who would be making that contact.
Okay, great. Executives and senior HR officers were asked to identify the most important considerations when selecting an executive education partner. They were given 10 statements, and they were asked to rank order these from 1 to 10, with 1 being their most important consideration and 10 being their least important consideration. Now, as you look at the list, you might have your own preferences, but these are what the results were. Reputation of the business school was listed as number 1, content of the program was listed as number 2, and faculty reputation was listed as number 3, and then so on down the list. It's very interesting to note that this study has been done numerous times over the past 10 years, and the results have always been the same for the top 3 responses. Content normally is number 1, school reputation is number 2, and faculty reputation is number 3. So these reference all important marketing points when reaching out to promote programs. Over the years, the only 2 items that have moved up in the rankings from being next to last or last are price and location. So clearly, there's much more sensitivity to price in the market today and where the program is being held than there appeared to be a number of years ago. We were fortunate in this study to speak to a number of executives, HR professionals, and alumni directors development directors during our study. As part of this research, we asked for their help and support to identify areas where there might be improvements. So we asked them what else they thought schools could do to contact more alumni for involvement in executive education, and they had a number of suggestions to offer. Some of their selected comments range from getting to personally know the alumni and their business. One of the comments that stuck with me was that a very senior CEO said that he hears from a number of schools where he attended executive education programs, but he has never gotten a phone call, and he emphasized never, for a request to speak with him personally. They're marketing to them in the fall when business budgets are being prepared was another comment from a former chief learning officer who said that as they put their budgets together in the fall after the strategy sessions, that's normally when the funding takes place for the following year. And her thoughts were that if there was heavy marketing at that point in time, there was a better opportunity that this would be placed in the budget so that it could be appropriately funded. Continuing to promote to them so they know what's offered. One of the real challenges that was noted not only by schools but by the senior executive individuals that we spoke to is that the more they know about the program, the more they can reference it to other people. Follow-up correspondence with a personal phone call seemed to be, in most of the interviews that we talk with, lacking. That could be both a staff issue and a timing issue, but I think with targeting of individuals, there certainly was an opportunity there to develop a tighter, closer relationship with certain alumni. Treating them individually and as special for being former graduates of the school was an important consideration. Not necessarily always, it was commented, the size of the discount that was offered, but more that there was one and that it was actively promoted so that they would know that they were being treated special. However, as previously noted, there might be serious consideration given to the amount of discount that's being offered and what the cost of an incremental seat really is to the university so that they could offer more of this benefit to their former graduates. And not making the alumni just a sporadic effort, but more a continual campaign to get people back on campus. And this had much more to do with non-financial opportunities that the executive education organization had with other school officials than necessarily with financial reasons. As a result of the work that we did and the research that we obtained and the feedback that we got, we developed a framework, and the framework really has 4 parts. One that we didn't hear a lot talked about was to do more research with alumni to understand what motivates them to become engaged, identifying their learning needs and what they're prepared to do to further their school involvement. The second area was in the area of connections, and this was an opportunity to meet with the alumni office and really try to get a much better understanding on what their goals are, how the list is constructed, what's available to them, and how they can work a lot closer together to offer a lifelong learning benefit, which executive education has, to the greater alumni population. The third was an approach, and that was providing an offer that's attractive and a communication plan that's personal to follow that up. So whether schools were focused on an alumni program or not, there was an opportunity here to reassess what that was, especially given the major announcement that the University of Michigan has just made, which may not be correct for every school, but certainly brings into question what really is the cost of an incremental seat and what is the real opportunity of bringing alumni back to campus. And finally, doing a better job at internal promotion to the key school officials of both the financial and non-financial benefits of getting former graduates back to campus. This had not only to do with process, but also with personalities, from the standpoint that many times the alumni office would like to know who was actually attending the executive education programs, and most often it was noted that this information was not freely shared. As far as recommendations go, Bob and I looked at all of the feedback that we got and what the research told us, and we came up with a series of questions that is in the report provided to stimulate executive education thinking, not only internally with the staff, but also externally on campus involving other groups of support. And we felt that this dialogue was very important to address some of the issues and some of the obstacles that people may find in alumni contact activities. In addition, a series of recommendations suggesting reviewing current programs and activities to determine their effectiveness and a possible need for change. Improving relationships and a better understanding of the alumni office personnel seemed to be key. There were a number of comments of people who had worked in alumni relations before that had transferred over to executive education, saying that they believed that that was one of the reasons why they had a much better understanding of the people there and the processes that were used. And always using a direct contact approach was mentioned in a number of interviews on the best way to court alumni to get them involved in either coming to programs, referring others to programs, or some involvement with the executive education program, either as a guest speaker, a panel, or a presenter. Reviewing the current discounts that are offered, I think we've talked about that. And the other opportunity that is a recommendation is to meet with school officials to determine where alumni contacts stand on the priority of other activities that are going on either with the individual business school or other schools on campus or the school in its entirety. Measurements and activities, when we asked this question, people could only give us what they really had to offer, and it was clear that a lot of time and attention was not focused on the measurement of this activity, whether it was how many people used the discount or how many alumni were in certain classes. So we would certainly recommend that there is more time and attention put here, because I think with the more measurements, schools may find that they actually have more alumni attending than they realize. Or it could be just the reverse. And then finally, communicate alumni attending programs, and this can have a number of benefits to alumni association groups, or especially to the alumni development office. Also in the report, for the schools that we interviewed, we visited every single website, and we visited not only the executive education portion of that, but we also visited the alumni link as well. And in many cases, it was very interesting and pleasing to see that there was a direct correlation between what the Alumni Development Office was promoting as an alumni benefit for executive education programs, and also what executive education had promoted on its page. So that's another area for individuals that did not participate in the study. You might like to go to your own website, see what currently is offered on your executive education page, and then go to the alumni page and see what they are talking about as well. So at this point, we've covered the highlights of the paper, which we hope that you've read by now, and would certainly like to open it up for any questions or comments that people who have attended might have. So Rob, I might turn it over to you at this point.
Yes, thank you, Pat and Bob, both, for a very informative presentation covering a lot of ground in terms of what's happening in alumni relations. At this point, I would encourage any participants to go ahead and submit their questions through the question panel, and we can address those questions as they come up. While we're waiting for some questions to come in from the audience, Pat and Bob, I was wondering, did you discover anything in terms of, there's so much being done in terms of kind of the B2C model in terms of reaching out to individuals via social media and other channels. Did your research uncover any insight in terms of how maybe the traditional approach might be shifting to some of these new technologies or social media platforms in alumni relations?
Some comments from schools that were focused on that, but they didn't seem to have, Rob, some very good measurements of the results of what that may bring. I would make a comment about discounts. We had 4 specific schools that said that they did not offer alumni discounts, and the reason they didn't was because they saw the transaction as being a business-to-business transaction rather than a business-to-consumer transaction. So the business-to-business transaction, the reason they said that they would not give a discount is because over 90% of all the tuition and fees are paid by the organization the individual comes from rather than the individual themselves. And that may be another reason why the size of the discount may be important. So relative to social media was looked at as a very good platform for sharing more information about the executive education program, but didn't seem to be able to produce the kinds of results that people would normally like to see about whether it was able to increase the number of enrollments.
Okay, from the participants, Pat and Bob, we've got a question. It seems like recommendations are mixing open and custom. A mailing to 20,000 alumni with personal phone calls is obviously now not practical. Any specific open enrollment communication recommendations?
Sure. I would say in the follow-up process, you certainly couldn't follow up with that size mailing. However, in the segmentation, and this was something that was talked about with a number of interviewees, a number of people cited that they wanted to reach companies and they wanted to reach people with certain titles. So I think in a follow-up, what you would want to do is you would want to segment those people that you believe might be your best opportunity to dialogue with and select some of those. And I believe that the paper also cited that you may want to do this in phases and pick anywhere from 20 to 40 or 50 names out and look at those and figure out what the follow-up might be there, because you certainly couldn't follow up with that number of people. On the other hand, you certainly could identify those alumni that you thought might be your best prospects for a conversation.
Great. And another question just in, can you comment on the differences you observed in discounts offered to different alumni groups, for example, degreed alumni versus exec ed alumni, or open program alumni versus custom program alumni?
Sure. There were differences in the size of discounts, and one that strikes me was I believe that the alumni were offered 20% at the business school, and the general alumni were offered a $300 discount. These discounts varied, whether some people were offered referral discounts who had participated in custom programs if they referred people to open enrollment programs. But I think the bigger issue is to look at the amount of discounts that you might offer alumni on more of a global basis and talk with the alumni office, see what other offers they are being given, and then seriously consider how much of a discount, because I think this question is focused too much at the financial aspects, sometimes at what kinds of revenue might we lose, because you have total control when people call to enter programs on whether a seat is available or not for that program. So I think what we saw was there were different discounts that were being offered, but we didn't note any significant change in what that was and the effect that it had.
Great. Do many business schools have a split in the offerings for executive education alumni and matriculated alumni?
A split as far as what?
It looks like from the question, let me see, a split in the offerings. So whether that might be the way they're offering different programs, I'm assuming.
Well, I've got a couple of comments on this. One is there were some schools that actually offered executive education participants who had graduated from their programs a discount if they would come to another program, or a discount if they would refer someone else to the program. So there was certainly discounting as well, not only with the greater alumni of the school, but also with, if you could call it, executive education alumni who had already attended other programs.
Okay. Let me just see if we have any other questions coming in. Again, just a reminder to participants, you can use your question box in your control panel to submit questions. Bob Stilliard, I think you're still on the line. We can, I think you may be on mute, but we can certainly take you off mute and see if you have any comments on any of the questions that have been coming in or anything additional to add.
Okay, I think I've been unmuted now.
Yes, welcome back, Bob.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I have one comment about the first question, which is that I think a number of, in relation to social media, I think that a number of executive organizations have tried to form social groupings and building their own platforms for those social groupings of alumni. But since the onset, since the advent, I should say, of LinkedIn, most of them had abandoned those attempts and allowed LinkedIn to be the platform by which more effectively alumni could be grouped into various geographical and sector type groupings to pick up information about alumni activities.
Okay. And we do have another.
Rob's.
Yep, go ahead, sorry.
No, well, just a quick comment about LinkedIn. We asked a specific question. If you didn't offer any kind of alumni status, was there anything else that you did with participants of executive education programs to connect them? There was a question specifically around LinkedIn and how successful that had been. A number of schools do it, a number of schools have tried it, and a number of schools cited what you might consider would be mixed results. They said that people during the program, when asked, were very excited to become involved in a follow-up platform after they left. But what most schools were finding, that when they put the LinkedIn up, people initially might be interested, but it was very hard to sustain that interest over time. And for that reason, a number of schools cited that they have now not done as much with LinkedIn, but are moving over to offering webinars to their past participants and to alumni, and that seemed to be more successful.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. Another question, beside program discounts, what other benefits are offered to exec ed alumni? Perhaps things like email addresses, or are there other unique benefits that are being offered besides program discounts?
There were some that cited that they would have a lifelong email address that could be accessed, but I think that we didn't find that most of the participant information was being shared in general with executive education graduates. So that's something that really came under an alumni benefit rather than a benefit for attending an executive education program. And I don't know any more than that, because that was the only thing that was shared with us.
Okay, and in a way you're kind of, that's a segue to our next question. I think you've partially addressed it, but in your research, did you come across any business schools which have actively created their own bespoke alumni programs for executive education alumni?
Yes, there were a number of schools that had mentioned that what they did is they either had done something or were working on something where they could connect more of their executive education participant alumni together in a group.
Great. Well, I think we'll give it just another second to see if any other questions come in. But in the meantime, I'd like to just thank you, Pat and Bob, both again for a very informative session today, and to remind people that are on the webinar that the webinar itself has been recorded and will be posted on the UNICON website for reference. Looks like we may have a few final questions coming in. Are there any schools successfully using their own proprietary collaboration platforms for alumni besides LinkedIn? Anything that they're creating from scratch?
The only comment that comes to mind is that there were two schools that I can think of in interviews that said they had tried that, and that actually it was really a monumental effort, and that therefore that they were more willing to use other platforms like a LinkedIn platform rather than to try and create one themselves. And that's really all I can think of as far as feedback.
Great.
Yeah, I think you're right, Pat. That was I support that that view. They really felt that to keep the energy involved, to keep such a platform updated and in good order was really not worth it.
Excellent. Well, I don't seem to be getting any additional questions through our question panel. So, Pat, Bob, thank you again for your time this morning or today with the webinar, and in the past for all the work you've done in compiling this research and this report. I think UNICON members will find it very helpful, and I think you've started a great, some provoking thoughts today with the webinar. So, thank you again, and I'd like to thank everybody for joining us, and we'll look forward to hosting additional webinars in the weeks and months ahead.
Thank you very much, Rob and Dan.
Thank you.
Thank you.